All right, so this is my Nikkormat student kit I'm selling on Reddit. Setting the other parts aside, the star of the kit is the camera and the nifty 50. Take the lens hood off. So it's a Nikkormat EL. It's an old camera, obviously. Nikkor and Nikon used to be separate companies. Now they're obviously one company, hence the name Nikkormat. It was stored in an unfortunate environment. It lived in a sort of damp outbuilding, not an ideal place to store cameras. But it survived. It survived intact. It's got some signs of wear. It was actually formerly owned by a photojournalist. I don't know how much he used it, but it doesn't seem like it was beat up too bad. It does have some grime. It's pretty obvious and noticeable. There's a little bit of rust on those two screws. If you open the back of the camera, there's a little bit of rust in that film door hinge. But everything that should work, works. Another condition issue to be aware of, the viewfinder prism has some gunk, for lack of a better word. It won't affect your photos, and when you hold the viewfinder to your eye, it's easy to get used to it, but there is a little bit in there. I believe I photographed it earlier. The lenses themselves were stored in the same condition, and it's somewhat difficult to see, which is good, but there is some fungus. You can kind of see it there. It's pretty slight. It kind of kills the resale value on these lenses, one of the reasons why I'm selling this kit pretty cheap. But it shouldn't affect your photos in any way. I've played with this lens on a different camera and didn't notice anything. There's also some fungus in this lens. I didn't really shoot with this one, but it's equally as unsevere. I don't believe the fungus should affect your photos in any way, but know that it is there. I also only have one set of caps between the two lenses. They'll work on both lenses. Just again, be aware of that. Let's see here. So that's all the condition issues. This flash was not stored that way. I tested it recently. I don't have batteries in it at the moment, but it does work. It's a good student flash, or it's a good flash period. It has very simple manual settings, as well as a basic automatic mode using a little light meter type contraption on the front called a thyristor. It's also the HV version of this flash, which for those who don't know means that it will work on a modern digital camera. Some old flashes you don't want to mount to new cameras because of voltage issues. This one will work just fine on this camera or a digital camera with a hot shoe if you have one. The directions are pretty straightforward. I generally shoot in automatic mode with this, typically yellow. You align the ISO dial with your ISO, and then basically whatever color you're in. Frankly, I forget which of these you should have it in if you use automatic. Let's say full. So on yellow, on 400 ISO, I would set my aperture to 4. So there's more tutorials online for that, as well as manuals and stuff online. The quirks of the camera, and this is a fairly quirky camera. To mount the lens, you need your little bracket, your little aperture bracket, and the black dot lined up. You need this pin moved all the way to the left, kind of aligned with that switch. And once all these bits are aligned, stick the lens on. It should fit in just fine. And then it's on. And now the lens is mounted, the aperture is connected to the pin. And then when you want to remove the lens, you should do the same thing in reverse. Make sure all the bits are aligned. Hold down your lens release button. Take the lens off. Simple as that. Works that way with both lenses. The controls are pretty straightforward. Your aperture control is on the lens itself. Your shutter speed control is this dial. Your maximum flash sync is that 125. You have an automatic mode, which is basically aperture priority. You set the aperture to what you want, and the camera chooses the shutter speed based on the built-in light meter. The light meter does work, something good to know. The camera itself is electronic. It won't work without a battery, and I'll get more to that later. The film wind knob works as usual. Shutter button works as usual. One quirk with this, though, is when the film wind knob is flush with the camera, the shutter button is locked. So you want this knob out just a little bit, showing that red dot to take photos. The ISO dial is over here, so the camera knows what your ISO is. You hold this metal pin in, and this whole outer ring moves. Then you set your ISO, say 400. Once you've shot all your film and you want to wind it back into the camera, you push this pin on the bottom and flip your little knob out and wind it back in. When you want to open the camera, this pulls up after you've flicked this little black switch here. So now it comes up. Pull it out all the way and the film door opens. It's a vertical plane shutter. Doesn't really amount to anything, just wanted to say that. When you load film, you put your film reel here, kind of lock it in, and you stretch your leader across, and you feed the end of the leader into this metal slit. Feed it in, maybe a ½ inch, and then advance the film until it locks in and your film leader is flush with the camera, and then close it. Advance it once or twice until you get to your first frame, and you're ready to go. Another tip, it's nice to wind this dial until it's taut. That way, every time you advance your film, this knob will turn a little bit, and it'll remind you that your film is loaded correctly. I think that's it. Oh, no, one big thing. The battery. This camera needs a battery to work. If you notice, there's no door on the bottom or the front or the back. The battery is actually located inside the mirror box, which is kind of a bad design choice, but that's where it is. The way you change it, you have a mirror lockup switch on the side. Speaking of controls in the front, you have your self-timer here, and you have a depth of field preview button here, and then your film release button here. Let the timer elapse. Click. All right, and your mirror lockup switch is here. So with the lens removed and the mirror locked up, it's a little hard to see, but inside here, there's a little black tab on the bottom. Flick that up carefully. You don't want to touch your shutter. And there is your little S28PX battery. And the battery that comes with the camera has a little bit of juice, but could die at any time. So you definitely want to buy a new battery because this camera is fully electronic, not mechanical. When the battery dies, the camera dies. But now you know where everything is, and that's the kit.